Coming up on this week's Flat Pack, we replaced Keith Melrose with a better, more knowledgeable version. We'll be looking back at York last week and asking, does the ground matter? Does the draw bias matter? Is there a speed bias? Does anyone know anything in horse racing anymore? And we'll be getting excited about this week's action, where the Celebration Mile is supposed to be the feature, but don't you worry. We're always on the lookout for something different, and we found a nice few tasty races to get stuck into, with the likes of Hamilton, Windsor, and of course, the Beverley Bullet. That's all coming up on this week's edition of the Flat Pack. Hello, welcome back to the Flat Pack. My name is Ross Brierley. We're in the box in Leeds. And if you haven't watched it before, where have you been? If you have watched it before, you know what we're going to do. We're going to go through last week's racing and hopefully pick out a few angles from York in particular, of course, 4 days of joy on the Knavesmire. And then we'll be looking ahead to this week's action, which admittedly is a little bit quieter. But the whole point of the Flat Pack is, doesn't matter how quiet it is, there are always angles to be found. Normally, I'm joined by Mr. Keith Melrose and Mr. Matt Gardner. Unfortunately, Keith has decided to go on holiday again. And oh, how he mocked Matt for doing that earlier on in the summer. But luckily, we've got a ready-made replacement. It is the second best Forsyth in show business. It is William Hill Radio, Berwick Rangers, and now Racing Post Flat Packs, Craig Forsyth. Craig, how you doing, mate?
I'm very good, Ross. Thank you for asking me to come on. I'm not sure I can match up to Keith's level, but we'll give it a go.
Well, that bar's very low, isn't it? To be fair. So you've already surpassed it sartorially. This is the most effort anyone's ever made for this show. Right,
that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
good to hear. Yeah, always like to do my best in that respect, Ross. So thank you.
Yeah, Matt Gardner, do you want to take a leaf out of Craig's book here?
Put me to shame here, isn't he? Yeah.
He really is. He looks like your dad's brought you in.
I thought about bringing in.
It's like, come on, son. I've taken you into town. We're doing a show.
Sort yourself out.
Yeah, I'm going to buy you some clothes, mate. He's 30 years old, Craig.
Yeah, just a youngster, Ross.
I know.
I feel very old in between both of yous.
Well, there you go. Well, you don't look a day over 31, mate. But York last week, we'll get to that in a little bit of a second. But first things first, we haven't seen each other 2 years, Craig, in the flesh. You gave me a little look up and down then. You're like, yeah, just check the hairline, see how everything's going.
Yeah. Well, you did try and make arrangements to come and see me, Ross, but I was playing a little bit of hide and seek on that occasion, and unfortunately we didn't meet up when you visited up north. So
I came all the way to Berwick, and you couldn't be bothered.
Yeah, well, it's just the way it was. Too busy, but great to see you again.
Yeah, went for a nice Indian in Berwick. There you go. So just it's a nice Indian every town, isn't it, Matt? You've been here all the time. You've been. Anything exciting happened to you since we last spoke?
Well, it was a busy week last week, wasn't it? Playing to go out with York, hometown.
But nothing outside of that?
Nothing outside that, no.
No?
No.
No life outside of racing?
No.
As soon as they jump off to when the last race runs, then you power down?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Plug in again and...
and recharge for the next week. If you're enjoying the Flat Pack, you'll probably enjoy the Racing Post Members Club. £4.99 for your first month, plus a free notebook. You get access to the paper before everyone else, tips, analysis, and you can watch all those replays back that we keep banging on about to see if we actually know what we're talking about. Perfect. Get involved at the Racing Post Members Club. Right, let's get stuck into it then. This is, of course, going out on YouTube, so please do like this show, if you haven't already. Press the little thumbs up button down there. It does make a big difference to the almighty algorithm. And do subscribe to the Racing Post channel if you haven't already. And keep those comments coming in. We had some lovely ones on the last show. And I've got to be honest, this is the internet, of course. So one nice comment is worth 6,000 negative ones. So all of you people actually saying good things about this, thank you for going out of your way. The one person who just logged on to type rubbish, I appreciate you going out of your way to log into your YouTube account just to tell us that. So, but you've got to find your audience, and you're not it. But we've got one lesson learned, as we always do for the show. What did we learn from last week's racing? We've got a few comments from our last show. Bill Warby learned that Matt's moustache is frightening the kids. So luckily he's had a shave. And a big shout out to Paul Deakin as well, who on last week's show said John Leaper and Trawlerman for the Ebor. So you'd have been screaming those two home, Paul Deakin. But let's see what lessons we've been learning from the panel this week, starting off with the guest Craig Forsyth, what did you learn from last week's racing, mate?
I think the York Ebor Festival, Ross after Royal Ascot, is right up there in terms of its time in the calendar, in the programme. 2 weeks after Goodwood, the racing is gone on a little bit of a lull in terms of the quality that we've seen. And York's a great pick-me-up at that time of year. Quality all the way through from the Wednesday to the Saturday, the track, facilities. Everything about the 4 days at York is absolutely fantastic. And, once again, I think we've learned that York Racecourse and the Ebor Festival is right up there.
Yeah, it really was. What I like about it is it's set up sensibly. You've got a clear feature race each day. You've got a clear sort of main support act each day. You've got every race is kind of tailor-made for some, whether it's 5 furlong, 3-year-olds or whatever it is. There's not a single race on the entire week where you think, why is that in the calendar?
No, not at all. Only the one maiden as well, the Convivial Maiden, that has thrown up many a good horse in previous years. This year's renewal, maybe not up to scratch, but there was a few interesting horses, particularly the Kevin Ryan horse that finished third on debut. So yeah, in terms of the setup, absolutely fantastic, and just been a little bit better if we'd got off to a better start with King of the Stars, Ross.
Well,
still hurts a little bit.
If it helps, I did back the winner.
Oh, thanks, Ross.
Can't be doing that.
I know, absolute disgrace. I apologise.
That's fine.
I apologise. I'll buy you a pint to make up for it. But I'll take you to Jersey on holiday to make up for it. Me, you, and John Nettles will have a lovely time out. Matt Gardner's too young to get that reference. So, Matt, what was your lesson from last week?
Galtres Stakes was a really interesting race to think about, kind of pre and post, really, in terms of it was a really good example of like established form versus potential. And usually you get a little bit of potential in a race and established form's kind of pretty high on the list, whereas there was 2 horses really that were kind of exposed, and the vast majority were unexposed, potential to do better still. And it's a case of opportunity, and the winner, Haskell, she'd won a Wolverhampton maiden, I think it was, run into about mid-80s, and on the bare face of it you think, well, she's got about £20 to find to win this, maybe more. But actually, she was a lot better than that. The ability was there, she just hadn't had the opportunity to show it.
I think she was probably one of the only, I would say, one of 2 horses at Wolverhampton in sort of 6 to 8 weeks that hadn't made all the running as well.
Yeah,
it was such a huge front runner's bias, and she was the big eye catcher coming from God knows where to win by half the track. So, but most people won't have really, they're not going to be keeping up with that.
No, exactly. And it's a case of, you get in 13-2 about a really well-bred horse from a top yard going into a race where the vast majority had to improve. And you sort of like, I definitely was guilty of it, just thinking, wow, she's got too much to find here. Whereas actually, the case of opportunity versus potential, she was very much a big tick in the potential box. She hadn't had the opportunity to show it, but the chances were that when she did, she would be good enough to do it. And obviously she was impressive in winning. So, but just an interesting race, because you don't get many that have that bias to potential.
Yeah, I got the feeling there was a little bit of that full stop last week, which we'll get into as we go back into York, but it did feel there was a slight handing of the baton from the first half of the season to the second half of the season in terms of form figures. And of course, the obvious, I thought you were going to say the lesson was, it's running memory of Sir Henry Cecil, and you had a Juddmonte 1-2. So never ignore the Juddmonte, a beautifully bred Juddmonte horseman. We've learned that all summer.
Yeah.
It's the second time that's happened, isn't it? Juddmonte 1-2 in the race?
Yeah, it might well be. I don't know. You tell me, Craig.
Timepiece?
Oh, it might be. Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know.
We'll look. Well, someone will comment below. We'll have looked after this by the time we've recorded it. If this was live, this would be great. But yeah, it probably is a certain an angle for the operation. I think the one thing I learned from last week was, which I've learned all summer, is that Saturdays off festivals, I just don't have the mental capacity to operate on the same level I've had all week. It's impossible to sort of, because we were previewing New York the week before, you're then looking at the sort of the 4 and 5 day decks, then you're looking on Monday at what's running on Wednesday. By the time you get to the first race on Saturday, I'm pickled. I'm absolutely pickled.
You must be really looking forward to a 5-day Cheltenham then, Ross.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait. I cannot wait. So for me, it's just take the foot off the gas. Because that's definitely happened at Goodwood. Ascot, I already know it happens a little bit because I don't particularly like the races on Saturday as much as the rest. But even with a 4-day festival, it still has an impact, I think. So other things to mention, get your lessons in below in the comments. And a quick shout out to someone on Twitter who I didn't copy his name onto the comment, but we'll put him in afterwards. Dan can edit it in. He said, jockey cam should be a regular feature on the course. I think we should personalise horse racing experiences for people. This could make this as a racecourse feature as motivation to attend. And that's a good segue into York because you backed one in the big race last week, and you watched the jockey cam of your runner in the Nunthorpe, and it added a bit of extra to your each way gains. It
did, yeah. It was good to see, particularly given the fact that the horse in question followed the winner through in Highfield Princess, and just seeing how well Highfield Princess quickened away at that speed at that time of the race was fantastic. And, again, it brings it home in terms of jockeys, and sometimes, you can be sitting watching a race and saying, why hasn't a jockey made that move to go left, to go right, to go sooner, to go later? And when you see it all happening at that speed on the jockey cam, you realise how skilled these people are, Ross.
Yeah, you realise that gap was there for approximately half a second.
Yeah.
I was there on the Thursday, and on the big screen they put up the jockey cam from that O'Mara handicap winner, Blue
for you.
That was it, yeah. And they got that really quickly after the race. So to see it on the big screen was brilliant because it was still fresh in your mind, and then you got a completely different perspective thinking, well, yeah, he's gone through a few gaps. But then you thought, well, he's gone through some small gaps.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Well, the only thing I can approach it to is rattling down the motorway, and you see people driving on the motorway, and you're like, "What is this idiot doing?" And you think, "Oh no, that's the jockey's job every single time to be ducking and weaving in a white Audi." Is essentially what they're doing day to day. But thank you to our commenter, who Dan is going to wonderfully edit into the show for this week's One Lesson Learned. But with that set up, let's move on and try and find what we can take out of last week's action from York, and hopefully a few future winners too. 4 days at York then, and plenty of fantastic winners, but one of the big winners, of course, was the track itself, and we talked about the Knavesmire before the week, and how a lot of people get a little bit banjaxed by the way that York tends to unfold. But, well, it was an incredibly fair week. You could win from the back, you could win from the front. There was sprinters, middle distance horses and stayers winning in various fashion. Quickthorn going off 20 lengths clear. Solcombe coming from God knows where to score in impressive fashion in handicap company as well. So for all the talk of how the Knavesmire can scupper a good bet every now and then, guys, it seemed like the track was the star of the show for a positive reason.
Yep. I think people take against York, I think, for that. Like they sort of have, front runners track, weird results, all that sort of stuff. But it is essentially a really fair track. And I saw someone on Twitter after early Wednesday, I think it was, going, you got no chance if you held up. And then Thursday, most of them came from mid-div or further back. It's just one of those, it's a track where the pace plays out.
Yeah.
The Ebor, that went steady, you had to be prominent, and you can win from the back over 7 furlongs on the straight course. It's just a really, really fair track. Yeah. There is obviously a little bit of bias every now and again where they need to be, far side on the straight course, that sort of thing. But essentially, it's very fair.
And again, I think is the reason people struggle with York a little bit is because the obvious biases and the problems you have, we were saying before, they're obvious, they're blatantly obvious. But when you say, my horse ran no sort of race, there's no obvious reason. You look at it like Solcombe won from the back because they went quick enough for him to land a blow, and Quickthorn did what he did because the fractions were right. And you were talking about King of Stars and Bergerac. You look at how slowly run that was early on, and no wonder your horse coming from God knows where was struggling to get his head in front.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all you want really is a fair playing field in terms of the track. And sometimes we're all a little bit guilty of looking for biases that don't exist. And York last week, early in the straight track, we were looking towards the far rail. I'm not sure that was a huge advantage, despite Bergerac hugging that rail in the opener and a few other winners coming up on the far side. But I think it was very fair, Ross, throughout. As you say, horses coming from off the pace, horses winning from on the speed. It was just very, very open, very good, fair racing.
Yeah, it appeared to be. And like you said, it was less People talk about the draw, but the draw basically just dictates where the horses are, and where the horses are dictates where the pace is.
Yeah.
Essentially, like you said, Bergerac. You watched that first. I backed Bergerac. Apologies again, but the reason was because he was a low-drawn front runner with course form who stayed a little bit further, and I thought if he can get on that speed, he's going to be able to dictate those fractions. And every other jockey in that race looked to Bergerac and went, "Oh, we'll follow him then."
Yeah. When you looked at it though pre-race, there was, looking at the pace map, there was pace all across the track.
Yeah.
Low, middle, and high numbers. But Bergerac showed a good bit of early speed to get into a good position, and I thought he got headed at one stage, and to see Bergerac battle back was a little bit of a surprise. But he done it well. I think one of the biggest factors last week, which rather than draw bias or your race position, was the ground. The times quickened considerably for day 3 and day 4, and we've seen quite a few soft ground horses that came to the fore last week, handle the conditions no problem.
And that's the, again, part of the problem with racing analysis is all the information we have, and then sometimes Quick Thorn comes out there clear, beating the ground like a drum. He's clearly got a soft ground action, but loved every second of it. Kim Ross, supposed to be a soft ground horse, and you mentioned, and Farhan, of course, who looked like he was being set up for a tilt at Doncaster again in November when the rain comes, and he's absolutely hacked up. So I guess the question there is, what's Chushan's excuse?
I think they maybe got a bit scared by Goodwood.
Yeah.
A little bit. Slightly firmer surface, he gets beat, obviously not, he wasn't far off his best, was he? But it's maybe just a case they just didn't want to risk him again. But it was pretty thin, and he probably should have run, shouldn't he?
Yeah. I would have thought so. But so how do you approach that then as a punter? If you're, because one of the things is, I mean, you watch a lot of replays and you're making notes on horses' actions. How do you react to horses with soft ground actions, with soft ground form, recording career bests over 2 miles on good to firm ground?
It's difficult, Ross. Particularly trying to get those thoughts out your head, and in terms of approaching a race, with a horse needing a required surface, and you pigeonhole the horse definitely needing soft ground, and it goes and wins in a time below standard and very quick ground on a track that favours speed.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to play with a bit of a more open mind and readjust, rather than cement yourself in terms of this horse must have this ground to show its optimum, to have its optimum conditions and show its best. But there was a few last week that turned the form around in terms of that's shown the best on soft ground and performing very well to win on a real quick surface.
Were there any horses, what did we take away from last week whereby you thought, okay, we can excuse that run? We can say whether they didn't particularly appreciate the way the race was run, whether they were drawn the wrong side. What were the horses in the races where you thought, okay, I've got a clear view of how I'm going to go forward with these form lines?
There was a few in terms of early on where they all did track over towards that far side. It was a bit more like old school York where they would come up that far rail, whereas obviously for the recent years they've been kind of coming down the middle of the straight. So you saw a lot more trouble on that rail than we've got used to. There was a nursery, I think, where sort of 6 or 7 in the ruck kind of met loads of trouble trying to get runs through against the rail. Same in
the Streets of Gold races.
Yeah, that one, yeah. And a couple of the 7 furlong mile handicaps were the same. So when you're picking through your replays, that's almost something that it's not quite the York that we saw, that we kind of got used to. It's a bit more like York from the sort of early 2000s where they were tracking against that rail.
Yeah, and then of course and this is another thing we need to learn from festivals, I think, Craig, is no matter what you see on the first day, gradually starts to cement on the second day, then completely changes on the third day, because everything then, despite the fact that the ground was fast, everyone came down to the stand side rail on the Saturday. Yeah,
there was no rhyme or reason really for it. The weather conditions didn't change over the 4 days. We didn't have to deal with that problem. But yeah, it was another question that needed answered in terms of where you want it to be. The last 2 days down the middle of the track was that place.
Yeah, okay. So it turns out that York isn't a bit of a form burial ground after all. It's incredibly fair, but you don't quite know how fair it's going to be until the jockey on your horse has decided where he's going to go. That's the part of the problem. The other thing I wanted to mention as well was what we do in racing a lot of the time, again, is you watch races back and you go, that was unlucky, things didn't unfold for that, this didn't quite work out. But I do feel that we are continuously underrating horses who actually get their head in front and win races. And that seemed to happen last week. 16 of the 28 races were won by horses who won on the last start. Now, I know that sounds, you must think, well, surely there's hundreds of horses, the vast majority of them are coming into off the back of career best performances. But it was 16 winners from 102 runners. So 15.69% strike rate, 43 quid straight level profit if you just back them all. And actual versus expected was 1.11. So horses who are coming into it in good form and winning last time out were massively outperforming. I mean, there's probably quite a few reasons for that. Matt, you're chomping at the bit to tell us one of them.
Well, I just personally, I know that you spend so much time hunting around in low-grade handicaps where horses, good recent form is thin on the ground, isn't it? You're looking at horses that are either coming back to form, whether they've hinted at it, they've come down the handicap or something like that. These good festivals, they're not doing that. Some horses get targeted at it, but most of the time you're trainers are desperately trying to hold on to a horse's good form and run them in these good races. Yeah. You got Goodwood a couple of weeks ago, some of them ran there, they come from there to York. Ascot obviously were on that kind of sequence. You've done well if you've been laid out for a really competitive handicap like that. Generally, you're a horse that's arriving in good form, maybe slightly progressive. If you're slightly ahead of the handicapper, then fair enough. But you're not hunting for that good recent form in the same way you are a Class 5 at Catterick or wherever.
Well, Class 5 at Catterick, there isn't any good recent form, is there? They're all it's the telephone number form books. And I wonder about this because I started to churn through the numbers, and to be fair, it started to kill me yesterday a little bit. I wondered if you boxed up every horse who finished in the first four in good races, say Class 4 and above, and put them all in combination forecasts, and just see what you get out of it. Because last week, if you'd done that at York, you'd have got every race forecast on the Saturday, you'd have got every race bar the opener on the Friday, you'd have got every race bar the mile handicap on the Thursday, and you'd have got 5 out of 7 on the Wednesday. And if you had put a pound a line for every perm, you'd have made just over £1,000 just backing in form horses. And some of those with like 11, 12 horses in a race. But that's what I'm saying. When you get to a certain level of quality of racing, it's so hard to get into these Class 2 races. You've got to be in good nick. Yeah,
particularly coming towards the end of August as well, Ross, where 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds have progressed up the handicap. So you need to be at a fair level to win. And I think the stakes races, some of those last time out winners have been well found in the market because people that bet using 10-year trends, etc. Many of those trends show up last time winners to be a huge positive. But in terms of handicap winners, you can still find value. 25 to 1, 28 to 1.
Point Linus was 25, wasn't it? Yeah.
Bergerac
was 22s. But even Blue for You was kind of like, I know it was the last time I winner, but horses coming into it, but you sort of 6-7 to 1 anti-pose a couple of days before.
There was that a day in Asia that had won 3.
Yeah.
And she went. Everyone got behind the Haggis thing, and something that's really progressive and racking up a 4-time. I went off 11 to 1.
Because the thing is, there's a fine line in this game, isn't it, between oversimplifying it and overcomplicating it, and that's where we're trying to sit. That's where we're trying to sit there. So I do think to a certain extent. For example, in the Ebor, only six horses in that race came into it off the back of the win. They finished 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 8th, and out the back for Benno.
That's a really good example of a race where it's just hard to get into. If you're 3-year-olds, you don't really see them anymore. It's a case of you're not that far ahead of the handicapper to win one. You're just in good form, and we saw that with Trollerman, obviously.
Is that for the Ebor now in terms of the prize money being a more valuable race? Is that more significant, do you think, because of long-term planning? You would think trainers with horses of that ilk will be planning a long way off for a run, even in the Ebor, and preparing a horse to come into the race and in good form, really.
You'd think so, but for me, there seems to be a conventional logic that you don't want to blow your mark for the big day. Whereas what it proved to me the other day was actually blowing your mark is offset by coming into it on the very best form full of confidence, and even like Alfred Boucher. If I'd said to you Alfred Boucher was going to get a beaten nose in the Ebor, even a week in advance, you'd have called me. Well, I don't know what you'd have called me, but we wouldn't have gone out.
You'd have got a big price for a run, Ross.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
you need to blow your mark to get in.
Exactly.
Basically.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, you need to blow your mark to get in. That's a good angle. In terms of the other races last week, there were obviously plenty of 2-year-old action. Matt Gardner, 2-year-old handicapper for the Racing Post, and again, he does a very good job of it because he's not far off 2 years old himself. And we had some impressive performances last week.
We did,
Matt, but it felt like to me like a passing of the baton from your early season Ascot performances to those horses who are starting to mature at the back end.
Yeah, it was really good to see Noble Style get his turn. We've been excited about him for a while, haven't we? And obviously he had that setback, which meant he missed Ascot. Really good. Like, he did loads wrong, came from a poor position, challenged down that near side on the flank, which, when you're an inexperienced hero, probably isn't the ideal thing to do. And still won with a bit to spare. And he's still kind of quite green as well. So,
because I thought you gave Marshman, was it 106 for winning at Thirst?
Yeah. And
so I did initially look at that and think Matt's gone mad here slightly.
Yeah.
But
He ran to 113 last week.
Yeah.
116 Noble Style, which is the second best 2-year-old now, behind Little Big Bear. And that form, obviously, with Persian Force at the weekend, Blackbeard, it sort of underlined that Persian Force ran fine behind him in Ireland. And I mean, he was about £10 below form, but you kind of think without Little Big Bear in that race, if he wasn't chasing a bit of a freak, he'd probably have run to somewhere around his figure. And that's all he had to do over in France. Blackbeard improved a little bit. But the other ones from York, Chaldine, 107, Swing Along 107, obviously dramatised, was pretty disappointing. I'm not really sure I buy into the idea that she got beat by stamina. Like, I find it hard.
It was part of it, obviously.
It was part of it, but I find it hard to believe that a filly that relished a stiff 5 furlongs at Ascot and won like she did, because the thing for me, she didn't travel as well as she did at Ascot at York.
Yeah.
She never threatened to quicken away from them.
No. She looked a bit rusty coming out of the boxes as well.
Yeah.
So I guess this is the question: is people say beaten by stamina, but I think that's too simple, isn't it? It's more that to run flat out over 5 is a different skill set to run over 6 in those races, and I got the feeling that she was almost learning how to conserve her energy over that extra furlong, and then it didn't quite work out, which I guess is stamina in a way, because she's learning how to stay that extra furlong, but it's not that she didn't stay.
Yeah, I mean, watching her in terms of trying to analyse what she did, her running style in her first 2 races, she looked the way she hit the line at Ascot that 6 would be easily within range. But it was interesting after the race that Carl Burke had said that Danny Tudhope had expressed real concern about going up to 6 furlongs. And I agree with Matt. I think the warning signs were there long before stamina became an issue.
Given how well the Platinum Queen ran, did she run in the wrong race?
Possibly. Now we know a lot more. I think going into the week they picked the right race. It's easy to say now after the event, maybe could have gone to the Nunthorpe, but I think 6 furlongs was worth a try in the Lauda, and unfortunately it didn't work. And I think we know exactly where she's going to go next time in terms of the trip.
Yeah, it's a moot point, isn't it? Because they've said she didn't stay and they're going to drop back in shape. I just don't think she was the same filly that we saw at Ascot.
Yeah, but it was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah, absolutely.
But it was a while between her debut at Newmarket and Ascot as well.
Yeah. I guess the thing is that she was considerably better than those in the Queen Mary, and maybe she just, I mean, she got beat by a stablemate, for God's sake. So it'd be interesting to see. I would have loved to see those conversations afterwards. That's for sure.
Interestingly, Swing Along, just because I was there on the Thursday seeing them, she surprised me at how kind of big and strong she looked. She looked a real sort of sprinty type. She really stood out actually compared to most. And Dramatize is a good sort, but compared to the rest of them, she stood out.
Yeah, and I got a really good figure for that Ripon win. And I think people kind of, again, went, it's Ripon, front running, bagged the rail. But it should have been a ring, brought the Ripon form to the table, came out of nowhere to score, obviously Swing Along as well. So you learn a lot at Ripon, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen some good performances there and go on to York and great success. The one thing about the juvenile races last week for me, I thought many were this year's horses, rather than going on to progress at 3. Maybe Noble Style apart, But I felt many of the horses that fought out the juvenile events are horses that will do well in the latter part of the season in some of the group races rather than kick on again next year.
I think that's fair enough. Yeah, I definitely think Noble Style is different in that regard. Like physically, he looks quite different. I think Meditate is quite a good example of that. She doesn't look that big to me, and she looks the sort of filly. Obviously, she won an Ireland at the weekend again. She looks the sort of filly where I think it's worth pressing on as a 2-year-old. Whereas Aesop's Fables may be a little different. He may be a 3-year-old as well, and they've had a bit of a setback with him. He's been a bit more lightly raced. So, but yeah, I think that's probably a fair point. Yeah,
That's kind of the way it goes. I mean, it's just it used to be that the 2-year-old season was a step towards classic generation. Now, given the way the breeding's going, isn't that part of the thing? Your early season, let's win as many group races as we can, and get the speed off to stud.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've still got the late developers as well coming through, the likes of Haskoy, and what have you. So we're getting to that stage of the season now where, you're seeing some of next year's horses starting to emerge in maidens, etc.
Nottingham Maidens. That's what we need.
Absolutely, love a Nottingham Maiden. And speaking of which, actually, the last thing we'll talk about the 2-year-olds was obviously this dramatised, the swing along, but I'm not entirely sure what you rated Bright Diamond, I think it was, at Newmarket, the other Burke horse who they brought out the Breeze Ups. But I was looking at that louder thinking, if you've got the first and the fourth best 6-furlong filly currently in this, you've got an absolute cracker who won that Newmarket.
I can't remember off the top of my head actually, but yeah, it did look good. Yeah,
curveball for you. Then.
Another one, Streets of Gold. You mentioned him earlier. He won that nursery. He looks a group horse, unbeaten. I thought he did really well to win actually. The first 7 in that are probably going to be close to top rated in a nursery when they run again.
Yeah.
And he beat them comfortably. So
and a lot of them came out like Goodwood Nursery, which we said was very good, that Run Star race.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, right, let's wrap up our look back at York with a couple of other. We'll just basically top things off. I think one race I would say, or one horse I want to particularly follow was Pink Crystal out of the designer 5-furlong 3-year-old handicap, who just keeps progressing. Every time I see that horse run, no matter what she runs in, I think this is not your race. Yet she still manages to win, or the other day get stopped in a run and rattle home for second. I think she's going to be one of those haggis horses who ends up being potentially listed class at the back end of the season. What would you take out of last week if you had to follow something off a cliff for the next couple of months? What would it be?
Ross Colin from the Clipper Logistics.
Yeah, I was not expecting that answer.
No, there was no hard luck stories attached to it. More so on his previous run at Goodwood, when he got caught out with a draw and been slowly away. But in terms of times over the first 2 days, the Clipper Logistics was the only race that dipped under standard time. And I think he's a horse that is at his best with a little bit of dig in the ground. So, getting to this time of year, I noticed he doesn't have an entry in the Cambridgeshire. I think he's in Goodwood on Saturday. But the weather forecast looks like it's going to be very warm this week, so we may have to wait a little bit longer on some softer ground. But I think he's probably going to edge down to a mark round about 100 now. And I think for some of these big late season handicaps, a little bit of juice in the ground, he'd be very, very interesting.
Yeah, he'll be at Haydock and Ascot on 7 furlongs and bad ground as well. I'm sure we'll pick up him later in the season. Same question to you, Matt.
Probably one at Sandown actually from the weekend. Zayn Al Arab, the Hamdan horse.
Okay, again another unexpected answer. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, small field handicap, and if you watch replay, they were all in a line about a furlong out, and he's won pretty comfortably in the end. But he only won by about 1.25 lengths. The handicap was not going to be able to do that much damage to him. He could rack up a bit of a sequence. He looks really progressive. Okay.
One race which I'm not necessarily sure I'd follow it off a cliff, but I thought Ride of the Week last week was Dettori. But it wasn't at York, and it wasn't in the Ebor. This might be arrogance on my part, but whenever I lay a horse in running or back a couple against it, or basically watch a race and think, God, this has got no chance, and then somehow they get up to win, I think, I should upgrade that. It might well be that I completely cocked it up in reading the race, but I choose to decide that it was more like a Dettori masterclass. And it's also a race that you mentioned in the notes as well, pre-show, and it was a 10-furlong handicap at Newbury, won by Frank Keller. All the way through that race, I thought every other horse was going to win it, apart from the horse that actually did. And Frankie, he kind of fell out of the stalls. He was 3 wide, again, very Trawlerman-esque. Gradually edged the horse over, got it into a nice rhythm, and got it on the nod in a contest where nothing seemed to go right, yet it still won.
Yeah, absolutely. Looked, I would say, many times in the race short of speed for 10 furlongs, looking at like a horse that would appreciate a little bit further, but was never stronger than at the finish, Ross. Really came home well in a quick time as well.
Yeah.
And that points me to, being a race that could throw up a few future winners. None more so than Admiralty House for Alan King, 0 from 6 so far. But the way he went through that race, he had to sit and wait. Unfortunately, the gap didn't come in time and he got out too late, but he hit the line hard and he looks well ahead of his mark. He's still a maiden after 6 runs, but I think he'll be shedding that tag very, very soon.
Because he'd come out of the Haskell race, right?
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. So his form is fairly solid. He hasn't had a lot of opportunities in his career so far. He certainly isn't exposed at this stage, and I'll be looking forward to seeing where he turns up next.
Could it be the Greatwood Handicap Hurdle, perhaps?
Hopefully there's something before then, Ross.
And finally, I'm going to ask you questions, but you have to answer them in one sentence and one sentence only. Can Alpinista win an ARC?
No.
No.
Fair enough. Should Baid win an ARC?
Hopefully.
That sounds like a man who's had an anti-post investment.
No, certainly not. No finance involved, but just love to see him emulate See the Stars.
Yeah, it'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Should, but won't.
Should he? He probably won't go for it, will he?
No.
But should he be there?
Should.
Yeah, okay. And Highfield Princess.
Good.
Not sure what my question was. I don't know what it was going to be. Yorkshire?
Yorkshire.
There we go. That's the correct answer for that. Okay, there you go. Lovely stuff. That just about wraps up last week's action, I think. So let us know what you'll be taking out and following off a cliff over the next couple of months from York and beyond, from the last 7 days or so. Coming up next is the hot list, and then we'll be looking ahead to this week's action. This week's hot list of the hottest racers throwing up winners left, right and centre is 2 from Kempton and 1 from Ripon. Starting off with Okeechobee, the novice event won in good style by that Juddmonte improver. He's gone on to win, admittedly, at about 1 to 500 in a 2-runner Wolverhampton novice, but there have been 2 winners down the field as well who've come out and franked that form in the shape of Maglac and Field of Honour, so it's looking like a race that could throw up a few this week as well, as deferred King of the Dance, and in particular Jupiter and Mars, who was a little bit of an eye-catcher mid-division in that Kempton race, might well go to Chelmsford later on in the week. The next Kempton race to keep an eye on is the race won by Strawberry, the Roger Varian improver who hacked up by 3.5 lengths, beating some nice types. Always nice to see a couple of horses down the field in those races come out and frank the form, and so far it's 2 from 2, with Duke of Verona and Eagle Court landing races last week. And we could have a few this week as well. Vanity Affair in particular goes to Newcastle for a bit of racing league action, and Legendary Days also got entries as well in all-weather action at the back end of the week. And the other race to watch out for is Foreseeable Future at Ripon. Ripon has been a bit of a front-running rail benefit recently. However, those horses who've won on that rail keep coming out and franking that form, including Foreseeable Future, who went on to win again at Windsor. There's also had Canaria Prince, Hot Scoop, and a couple of others run really well out of that race as well. So it looks a good sprint handicap for the grade, and we might have more winners out of it this week in the shape of the Grey Lass, Point of Woods and Marcelan, who all have entries later on this week. Day 3 for the hot list. Fingers crossed they work out nicely for you by this time next week. Now, after the ups and downs of York last week, it's a quieter few days, I would say. And even though, in theory, it's a celebration at Goodwood on Saturday, but it's the kind of celebration where you send out 400 invites and only your mum, your dad and your gran turn up for the party. So, there's still got to be a winner to be found, though. And it's your nan. She's had 6 ciders. She's getting carried away. But we'll be having a look at Goodwood for the celebration mile. We've got another sales race at Newmarket. Who doesn't want more cash for speedy 2-year-olds? We've got an interesting list at Sprint as well. We've got the Beverley Bullet, of course, which, to be fair, is often a little bit of a signpost to back-end winners. Tis Marvellous won it last year and was in good nick, and he could be back for another crack this week. And of course, Windsor kick in with a couple of black type contests on Saturday night as well. So it's slightly more low-key. It's spread out. Again, it's like that party you've arranged. It's not a very good buffet, but there's a lot on offer. Put it that way. Let's start getting through the sausage rolls then with Craig and Matt.
Mum, Dad, Gran, what about the Vindaloo, Ross?
that is true, yeah. I think we'd have to pay royalties, though.
Right.
I don't know. What was it? Was it Fat Les? Is that? You can't remember. He's 12 years old. You can't remember Vindaloo, can you? Have you ever had a Vindaloo?
The food?
Yes, the food. Yeah. No, the Charlie Hills all with a handicapper. No, sorry, that's Vindalova. Sorry.
No, I have,
Yeah? Yeah, still recovering?
Just.
Okay, good. We'll get Fat Les if you're watching. Keith Allen? Is it Keith Allen?
Even I can't remember that, Ross.
You brought it up.
I know. I just thought you'd have brought it into play, that's all. It's World Cup coming up as well.
Yeah, that is true. Oh, God, yeah, that's weird. Yeah, we're going to have a Winter World Cup, aren't we? Yeah, forgot about that. Anyway, that shows you how interesting... That's it for our previous choice. We'll wrap it up there. We'll get to Goodwood, Newmarket, Beverley and Windsor in a second. But it would be rude if we were to invite Craig down from Berwick and you weren't going to throw a bit of a northern Scottish borders angle into things. And you love a bit of northern racing, Craig. You love a bit of northern racing. Hamilton, quietly one of your favourite tracks. And after my trumpeting of the Glasgow Stakes earlier on in the season, it's your turn to go crazy over the Lanark Silver Bell.
Yeah, well, Ross, we are bathed in glorious sunshine down here, but up towards
basement.
Up towards the west coast of Scotland, it's rather wet and already good to soft ground at Hamilton. Rain forecast Wednesday, Thursday. So I think we're going to be dealing with soft ground on Friday night. And the one horse that interests me in that race is Kevin Ryan's Forza Orta, who's been very progressive this year. Started out at Thirsk as his first run back. That was on soft ground. That was his last run, actually, on soft ground, and that race couldn't have worked out any better. Won by Get Shirty, who went on to, I think, win 3 races before finishing 5th in the Ebor. Contact, who was 2nd, went on to subsequently win a couple of races. And, for a horse having his first start of the campaign in a much higher grade to where he finished off last season as well, I thought that was an excellent third on that occasion. He's gone on himself to win at Hamilton in good to soft ground. And, of course, going with your last time out winners, Ross, from York last time, he was coming home on the front end on that occasion. The second ran really well at the weekend.
Yep.
There's a few from the York race that have run well in defeat since, and I'm hoping he's a very well handicapped horse on 89, running on Friday night. He's got his conditions. His progress hasn't finished. He hasn't hit anywhere near the ceiling of his ability at this stage. I think he's ahead of his mark and will have an outstanding chance on Friday.
Could this be a case? Because there's about 53 entries, I think. Is it going to be one of those weekends where you get, like the Celebration Mile, you look at it and you think, 53 entries, then it turns up and it's a 5-runner mess around?
Looking at the entries, I think we'll lose a few, obviously, particularly with the ground, but I would be hoping there'd be a good turnout. This race usually does attract a few runners, so I'm hoping that, a double-figure field would be good.
Okay, the Lanark Silver Bell then on Friday night. It's going to be more exciting than the Celebration Mile, isn't it? How many entries did you say there was in the week?
I'm sure I've seen 33 or 34, including the 2nd, 3rd and 4th from France that finished behind in Spiral. And now I think we've got horses that finished 3rd and 4th at Catterick and Thirstcross that are left in.
It's pretty special, that, isn't it? I mean, the weird thing is, of course, we spent all summer getting frustrated that the mile division has been dominated by a Shadwell horse winning at odds on while nothing else has got a chance. Who knew that we'd have the same thing in the Celebration Mile? But it wouldn't be Baaid. It'd be
Mutasabe.
Yeah. There you go.
It left you hanging there.
That's how exciting the race is. The Shadwell favourite has drifted into out of my imagination. He's a horse who's he's not had the look of the green, the rub of the draw all summer. But I wasn't necessarily expecting him to be 4 to 6 for a Group 2 on Saturday.
No, he's a very Celebration Mile horse, isn't he? Like the sort of placement of it in the calendar, you're always going to get Div 2 milers because we've got York, we've got Goodwood not long ago where good ones get diverted off to France, obviously, as well. And Div 2 milers this year and for the last couple of years have been Div 3 or 4, really, haven't they, when you think about it. But, he's the sort of horse where he's a bit of a monkey. He's sort of always looked like he's had the potential to do a bit better. But but we're kind of past the point where we're thinking he's going to be a proper Group 1 horse, which he looked briefly earlier in his career. And this is kind of going to be, like you say, short price, bit of a non-event with not much taking him on, but he'll probably win, get the job done type thing.
Yeah, which doesn't really bode particularly well for excitement purposes for the feature race of the weekend.
But will we get the 5 going to post, or will that cut up even more?
Well, yeah, it might, I mean, because Finest Sound and Escobar ran last week. I mean, it could be a
Jodomi, possible, other engagements, track being an issue, has hung in the past, has hung twice on his last 2 starts. So,
but if you're their connections, you're going to be looking at this going, this is who cares?
Probably
if the track,
forced to run now. Yeah,
you just got to have to go, aren't you?
Yeah.
What's because there's centred at Windsor on Saturday night as well. Is that right?
I think it's Windsor. On Saturday. Yeah.
So they're going to look at that. I think
the favourite was a little bit unlucky in the race last year as well. Made his charge up against that far rail. Probably wasn't the ideal place to try and attack.
But that horse it's constantly unlucky.
He's always looked like he's going to do a bit better than he's ever done.
Yeah.
And
he was unlucky at Sandown earlier on in the season as well.
Did he get out battled at Ascot last time?
Yeah.
He's a bit. I think he's a little quirky.
Yeah.
Just, I suppose the lesson from this is if he wins nicely, don't get lulled into backing him for a good race afterwards.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Yeah, fair enough. Unless that confidence boosting win completely turns him around.
Maybe.
Who knows? Elsewhere, we've got another sales race at Newmarket for the juveniles. A couple of interesting entries.
Yeah, this one looked
go.
quite thin a little bit.
I thought you were going to get excited then.
No,
excitement coming.
Yeah, no, it looks quite thin, but there's 2. You mentioned one, Amici, and Boy Browning is probably the one for me, I think, who he ran in that Goodwood Maiden behind Mischief Magic or whatever it is.
That's come up about 5 winners in the past week.
Yeah, it's worked out really well. And then he was really impressive at Windsor the time after. I think a slight rise on the finish at Newmarket will really suit him. So, and Amici impressive at Kempton. So,
I mean, I was blown away by that Amici performance. I think I backed the horse who finished 3rd. The favourite came out. The horse who finished 3rd, I thought, was a borderline certainty. It looked like it was going to win the race a furlong from home. And then here came Amici out of absolutely nowhere with huge physical scope, eating up every inch of the ground, one going away. I went back and did the time, and it was fantastic. And I was thinking, we've got a proper horse on our hands here.
They're the 2 I'd be focusing on because you go through these, it's a little bit later in the year than Newbury, obviously, where there's still some coming in with a bit of potential there. Most of the entries in this Newmarket one, they've run 4 or 5 times. They're those early 2-year-old types that have already reached their limit a little bit, whereas these 2 are the 2 that stick out really as having some potential. So good forecast.
Yeah.
The thing with Amici as well, in terms of the Kempton performance, the time was good, Ross, but the horse wasn't fully extended to go out and win.
Yeah.
Could have been better. And that leaves us with the impression that this is a horse open to massive improvement. I don't think he looked anywhere near the finished article at Kempton. And
well, they say when you say a horse, the penny drops late.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the penny even dropped, and it still managed to go and win. Again, it's one of those replays I was watching back going, I knew the result, and I still thought, this can't pick up, can it, from there?
Yeah, and I think that there might be a little bit of value as well in terms of the price. And going back to Matt's point earlier on in terms of the Goltras, there's horses in here that have earned higher marks from what they've done earlier in the season. They've ran in better races, so they've had the chance to go and put a mark where this is an unexposed horse who's only ran twice. Very, very impressive at Kempton. Possibly could go under the radar because of that.
Yeah. There is the old, very different track, isn't it? Kempton to Newmarket. But elsewhere on the Newmarket card, there's the Hopeful Stakes Great Ambassador, probably one of the biggest eye catchers in the glorious Goodwood review, and quite a few of those eye catchers have worked out quite nicely. He is one of those horses I think I'm going to back until the end of time, and he'll win at 6-4 and get beat at 16-1 and. You'll never quite get to the bottom of him. But he's a sprinter, he's still time, isn't it? And the sprint division, we've already established, it's bad, isn't it?
The Great Ambassador direct debit is well established by this point, isn't it? But no, I think you're right. I think he's definitely got a big one in him. He just needs the right setup. He's been very unfortunate, and if he gets his setup, you wouldn't be surprised to see a big performance from him for sure. Yeah.
Then how many times do you forgive sprinters like that? I mean, because you've got to forgive them a bit more than most divisions, I would say. Yeah,
there's more hard luck stories to be had with a sprinter, more so than middle distance horses. Simply, going back to the head cam just shows what and that was a wide open track. at Newmarket, I'm sure it'll be. They'll probably go for one of the other rails, and it may get congested. So I hope for you, Ross, that Saturday is the day.
Touch wood, because otherwise, it might not be. That direct debit's going to be getting rejected, I think, by the end of the season. Elsewhere, we've got the Beverley Bullet, and we've also got those Windsor races as well. Anything to mention from those? The Beverley Bullet's a bit of an old timers benefit. You might get a 3-year-old favourite in Manakan, but it tends to go to a slightly more experienced and battle-hardened performer like yourself, Craig.
Yeah, I've got the scars, Ross. But no, I like the run of Manakan at Ascot on Sugar Cup Day. Tracked the pace, got into a good position, ideal running style for Beverley. Then I seen your notes saying this is an old timers race, and you're looking back at last year's winner, Tiz Marvellous, who I have to say came into the race 12 months ago in better form than he does this year.
Sugar Cup race, hadn't he?
He did, so let's hope that there's a repeat bid on this year with Manakan, who clocked a good time as well that day at Ascot. So yeah, I'm hoping that it's a year for the classic generation.
Okay, well, I might tiptoe in with Judicial again, potentially. And the other race I mentioned, or the other horse I mentioned in particular at Windsor, we talked about Grocer Jack earlier on in the season after he'd won at Newbury. And we were struggling to kind of work out just how good that performance was. Potentially got the run of the race. There was a decent rating attached to him, but how good is this horse? I thought he was potentially overbet at Haydock, but then that form looks really good. And I thought that was one of the big eye catchers again, a low-key eye catcher in the sense of he got taken on for the lead, they went a real good clip, and he kept going and going and going, and only just got beat by a nice horse. He could be perfectly suited to Windsor.
That run style's perfect, isn't it, for Windsor? Yeah. They tend to, get down the back. They really slow up on the bend because it's quite sharp, isn't it? And then you sort of kick on from about 3.5 out there, and they do take some catching, particularly if you're on that rail on the near side. So he could be ideal for it.
Could they be even more aggressive with the tactics and maybe make the run in the way he stayed on again?
Yeah.
At Haydock, I think
I think they wanted to, but then the spoiler kind of maybe, I don't know if there was a bell went off thinking we could really
need to tuck in here and but the way he's hit the line and stayed on strongly, I wouldn't be surprised if there was even more aggressive with the tactics and made the running.
Okay, lovely stuff. Well, it might not be a vintage week, that's for sure, but I'm sure we'll. I've given you something to think about for the next few days. I don't need to ask you what horse you're most looking forward to, I don't think. Given, I see this is what this show's all about. The amount you wax lyrical about a Kevin Ryan handicapper at Hamilton on a Friday night. That's why I knew you'd settle in nicely to the format, Craig.
Well, you've got to stick to what you know, Ross, and what you know best. And there's no point trying to go off down to Windsor for a bit of black type. We'll go to Scotland for a bit of tartan.
Absolutely. You're a northern handicapper at heart, aren't you? Yeah, I can feel it. Matt, what about this week?
Yeah, those two in the sales race. I like a race where there's a big field and you almost get buried a little bit by the numbers, but when you can pick through quite quickly to two that have so much more potential than the rest, Boy Browning and Amici, that's ideal for me. So those two would be the pair I'd be focusing on.
And to be fair to you, your handicap of the 2-year-old's been spot on this year.
Ish, yeah, not bad.
Yeah, it's been all right.
Yeah, it's been all right.
Yeah, I think you've done well. You can have another year. Fingers crossed. Great ambassador will start to find his feet again at the back end of the season. But whatever you're back in, good luck, and we'll be back next week to then pick through this weekend's action to see if we were right or not. That's the joy of this show. It's the joy of the flat season as well. I was going to say it never ends, but it does in a few weeks' time. But if you haven't already, if you've got to this point, like, subscribe, comment below. We love the interaction. Matt Gardner sits at home, just ready and raring to go to reply to all the things. So tag him in it. He'll reply to anything, this lad. He's 30 years old. Follow him on TikTok as well. It's at Gapmardner. He puts lots of lip-syncing videos up. Absolutely loves it. In fact, there we go. There's his mum ringing now to tell us that his lunch is ready. That's another edition of the Flat Pack then. Like, subscribe, follow us on Twitter at Matt Gardner MG.
Yeah.
There you go.
10 out of 10.
Thank you. At It's Ross Brierley. And Craig, are you still tweeting?
I am, yeah. At Craig Forsyth _.
Oh, yeah.
But a quick warning, if you don't like the lower leagues of Scottish football, then you may want to follow yourself, Ross, or follow Matt.
Fair enough. Yeah, I forgot. I have muted you. But I'm sure this the Venn diagram crossover of flat racing fan and Berwick Rangers supporter isn't just Craig. So do follow him if you want to get involved in that. Thanks again. See you next week. Have a good weekend. If you're enjoying the Flat Pack, you'll probably like the Racing Post Members Club, and for only £4.99 for your first month, you'll get replays, tips, articles and analysis. That's even better value than a sandwich and a bag of crisps from your local Greggs. Lovely stuff. We'll even throw in a free notebook as well. What more do you want? The Racing Post Members Club. Better value than a sandwich.